imitating the very first church gatherings of the Christian tradition, when people of all ethnicities and races and social classes would gather together and have what they called a love feast. They would get together and share a meal, to commune, to worship, to laugh, to pray. But both before and after they got together and had this meal, they would walk around their neighborhood. They would visit the sick and the elderly. They would take care of the poor amongst them. They would make sure the widows had their rent taken care of. They would make sure everyone had a place to sleep and a full belly. And most importantly, they would make sure that everyone was seen, noticed, valued, and belonged. St. Benedict built his community around these rules and formed them into this book. And if you walk into any bookstore these days, or if you go to the website that rhymes with Wamazon, you will find many versions of basically the same book on how religious institutions do hospitality. How do we follow the tips and tricks of what it means to welcome in the stranger, to do good outreach, to follow the recommendations of being hospitable? Things like having clear signage as to where your sanctuary is, where you're supposed to sit, having clean toilets, having open parking spaces, having ushers who smile and greet people by name, having congregants wear their name tags, greeting guests with a familiarity and inviting them back personally. These are all signs of hospitality and welcome in congregations. So we hear radical hospitality, and you might think, oh, okay, like that's what we do. But we just do it with like more emphasis, more oomph. If we follow the rules, if we welcome in people with lots of extroversion, and if we reach out to people with lots of extroversion, then we're on the right path. We're doing what we're supposed to do. The two key stepstones to widening the circle, we might say, of welcoming and reaching out. And then if we follow these rules, like St. Benedict said, we get closer to God, to the beloved community, to the kingdom of God, to the kingdom of the good, if you prefer. Lots of folks feel this way, including us UUs. Brittany Crawford from the UU congregation in Asheville writes, welcoming is the first act and the ongoing work of belonging. It's impossible to belong in a place where you do not feel welcomed. So we welcome first-time visitors, we learn their names, we invite them for coffee and conversation, and then we keep inviting them back. To welcome over and over again is to extend the invitation of belonging. So I want you to take a second and think about our congregation and your personal history. Do we welcome folks in? Do we welcome folks in? Do we follow these rules? Beyond welcoming, this other stepstone is outreach. We've had lots of talks about outreach, especially in this new pandemic phase. Are we attracting enough new members? How do we get more kids and families? How do we get people back in the pews? Lots of space here for people to come. That's very welcoming. We've talked a lot about outreach ideas. Should we advertise more? Paper and online? Should we use social media to this purpose? There's a lot of emphasis on outreach and extroversion. And as I was doing my study leave, I started to wonder. Because to me that sounds like following all the rules, and I'm wondering, is that just being friendly? Or is that what radical hospitality is? And what is the emphasis on welcome and outreach? What is it producing for us? What is it doing for us? Anything more than giving those of us who are introverts minor heart attacks during the service when we were expected to go and welcome people, and then we go and crash for an overstimulation nap in the afternoon. So what if radical hospitality is something beyond both welcome and outreach? Because St. Benedict had all these rules. It's a very long book. Shay just read a very small portion of it. Rules about welcoming the stranger, rules about getting up at the crack of dawn, rules about literally cleaning the bathrooms, providing for the every need of the pilgrims. But these rules were not the goal of their communal life. Right? The goal was to help lead the community towards what we might call beloved community, towards closeness, oneness with God, toward what St. Benedict would have called the kingdom of God. So welcoming in folks and doing outreach, these are great practices. These are great core values to have. Friendliness is a great thing. Extroversion is a great thing, even if I have to take a nap afterwards. But what is it producing? This was the question I kept asking myself. Why would we want to do radical hospitality? What's the reason? Why should that be a core value for us? Because we want a bigger congregation? Do we want more pledge units? Do we want more volunteer power? I might say yes and yes and yes. But what is that doing for us, within us? Does that lead us towards beloved community, just following the rules? Because I know we're friendly. I know we're a place where people can feel like they belong. And in these listening sessions, as part of the Widening the Circle campaign, people kept bringing up radical hospitality. Radical hospitality. What does that look like for us? Well, I think the question that we're asking is one that we've been wrestling with for a long time. Who do we want to be? Who do we want to grow into? And why are we us? What's our reason for being as a congregation? So we have the small but mighty crowd, and folks online, you can participate in this too. If you're on the board, you don't get to answer. What is the mission of this congregation? What is the mission of this congregation? You don't have to know it, but if you know what it is, can you raise your hand here in the sanctuary? Okay. It's fine if you don't know it, because I did not know it until a year ago. And I work here. Here's a hint. It is on your order of service. It is on the front page of the order of service. It says, building beloved community by embracing all souls and nurturing wholeness. This is a new mission statement that was crafted by the board over the past 2 years. Not just welcoming in, although that's part of it. And it's not just reaching out, although that's part of it. But when I read that, I think about what does it mean to bring people in, embrace them, and send them away more whole, more healed than when they entered. Not just by following the rules, by having coffee at just the right temperature and making sure there are enough parking spaces. Not just by doing good deeds, but by trying to nurture wholeness in hearts and minds of anyone who walks through the doors of this sanctuary. When I hear hospitality and I think of Airbnbs, I don't know about y'all, but I have stayed at some wonderful hotels and Airbnbs, and I have been to all-inclusive resorts, had all of my needs taken care of, left refreshed and rested and more tan than when I entered. But I have never left one of those experiences feeling more whole, more healed. So the mission that this congregation crafted, the why we came up with, the reason for being, the theological yes that we say, demands that we ask, how do we build beloved community by embracing all souls and nurturing wholeness? So let me take you back to the before times, to before COVID, to before the fall of Roe, to before January 6th, to a time when the tips on hospitality were more or less the same as they were when St. Benedict wrote his rules. What does it mean to not just be hospitable, or maybe even extravagantly hospitable. We could put a mint on all the seats in the sanctuary so that people had something tasty when they came into the church. What is the difference? Because radical welcome is the first and constant step we take to become a place of belonging, but it's not the end goal, we say. Just like passing the 8th principle here is not the end of the work, right? It is the beginning. So I started to think about radical hospitality not as a goal, but as an entry point, as a core value, as a foundation for everything we do. And if the goal is to build beloved community, to build the kingdom that is not just some philosophical, theological concept, that is a real, lived, flesh and blood reality where people not only have their needs provided for, but are also provided with a full sense of self, a place where people are seen, valued, welcomed, where they belong. If that's the mission of this congregation, the Great Commission, friends, that's kind of a culture shift for us as mainly Western Americans. Because to welcome and center the other means to decenter yourself. To welcome the pilgrim, the poor, the marginalized, the outcast, the stranger means decentering yourself. Which might mean that we don't do Sunday morning the way we usually do. It might mean we don't do the stones in the water. It might mean we don't sing the hymns that we thought we were going to. It might mean that we think about Sundays in a completely different way. It might mean that we change. And change is hard. And it can be uncomfortable. And it can be painful. And it can be awkward. Think about how much change you have gone through in the past 3 years. We have gone through in the past 3 years. Our country, our world has gone through in the past 3 years. Uncomfortable, painful, and awkward only begin to describe it. And think about what it means to be living on Martha's Vineyard and to have a group of asylum seekers show up on your doors and not only provide for their needs, but help them find wholeness and healing. It might mean that we change by centering radical hospitality. And it might mean that we transform. And friends, that is the word that I kept coming back to in all of my study, reading all of these books and thinking long and hard about what it would mean for us. Radical inclusion, radical welcome, radical hospitality, radical love. All these words point towards change and transformation. It's different than extravagant need taken care of because it leads to wholeness and healing and embraced souls as part of a beloved community. It's not just the good deeds and the smiles and the wearing of name tags that leads to the goal, but it is the change that happens within you when you decenter yourself and welcome in the other. It leads to transformation at your very roots. Because the word radical, as St. Benedict could have told you because he was a Latin scholar, the word radical means root. It is what is at your core, what is way down deep inside you that everything stems from. So if radical hospitality not only makes people feel welcomed, not only invites people back, it makes sure that everyone is seen, noticed, valued, and belonged. It leads to wholeness and healing and transformation. not just in those who are welcomed in, but in those who are here. It has to, or we're just an Airbnb. And maybe that's a fine goal, to have a 5-star Yelp review. Maybe that's where we are right now. And that's okay. Because our constant challenge as people of faith is to keep reminding ourselves that we are in a community, believe it or not, of people who are not exactly like us. That there is a lot of diversity to our community. And to be radically hospitable is to have a congregational norm that is radically inclusive, not out of a sense of duty, but out of our anticipation of how each new person will change us, writes Reverend Renee Rahutsky. That the anticipation of the change to the community is part of being radically hospitable. To echo our story from last week, this year's river is not the same as last year's river. And I'm excited for this new river. Friends, I invite you to engage with one another about what it means to be radically hospitable, what we might have to change, what we might have to give up from the before times, and what is something new that we might transform into. Because although this year's river is not the same as last year's river, I am excited for this new river. In this world of hurt, friends, we are called to be healed and healing. In this world of hate, we are called to be loved and loving. And in this world of change, we are called to be changed, changing, transformed, and transforming. And it starts with each of us in this room, each of us watching online, to ask that question. What does it mean to be radically hospitable? What does it mean to change? And what do we want to transform into? May it be so. May it be radically, radically so. Amen. Mike, your check is in the mail. Don't worry. This is the time in our service where we offer up our gift of financial resources. There are so many ways to give back to this congregation, to be radically hospitable. It might be that you work at our flea market, which we have a big announcement about. It might be that you help with religious education. It might be that you come and offer your voice to sing in our sanctuary. No matter how you choose to give back, we are grateful you are here. This is